Well, I've got up this morning and the whole place is covered in snow. Got 3 inches of snow. There's no apparent warning, really. Yesterday was beautiful and sunny and quite warm, and today this is what we have. And it is absolutely stunning. So I do feel I should be talking about snow, or thinking about snow, and thinking about the transformation of liquid to solid, or something along those lines, or about something falling from above. But I'm not, because what I've been reading about, which is fresh in my mind, is some references to sublimation. I came across the reference initially, or what prompted me as a reference I came across in Bachelard's book Air and Dreams. And there's a section in that. It's a lovely book. He's talking about what he calls the aerial imagination. But in one part of it, he's talking about sublimation in psychoanalytic terms. And sublimation is a term that is used extensively in psychoanalysis. And I can't remember the phrase that the exact passage that Bachelard gives, but he's talking about this idea of sublimation in say, psychoanalytic terms. And it's got me thinking about what that term means. How do we understand that term? What's operating in us when we hear that term that allows us to understand it? What sort of experiences are we having, or have we had, or do we know about intimately that allow us to understand it? It seems to me there's a few things going on there. The first is that sublimation, firstly, is a chemical process. It's the transformation of a solid to a vapor, without in which it transfers directly from solid to a vapor without going through an intermediate period of liquidity. Certain chemicals do that. You heat them up and they vaporize without melting first. And indeed condense, or sublime as it's called, somewhere else. So for example, if you put a certain chemical at the bottom of a test tube and warm it up, it'll apparently vanish from the bottom, or at least vaporize. You'll see vapor coming off it, but it won't melt, and then it will appear towards the top of the test tube. It will sublime, as they say. So the first thing about this term sublimation, in its broad sense and its application to psychoanalysis, is that it marks a transformation. And it's a very particular kind of transformation. The fact that it evades this period of liquidity, this intermediate stage, it smacks of the magical almost. There's something quite alchemical about that transformation. There's I can't think of a better term for it really, other than alchemical. It is an unusual and rare and rarefied, literally, process. That's the first thing about it. The second thing about it is, of course, in literal terms and in metaphorical terms, that sublimation is also an ascension. This is where Bachelard is most clearly referring to it. It's an ascendant process. The sublimation happens upwards. And that's interesting in relation to its use in psychoanalytical language. It's occasionally presented in psychoanalysis as a complement or an opposite to repression. So in psychoanalysis, sublimation is when an inappropriate desire is transformed into an appropriate desire. So for example, unwarranted sexual desires would be sublimated into art making, for example, or into religious practice, for example. And that's considered relatively healthy, whereas the transformation, the hiding or the burying or the pushing down of those desires, which is referred to as repression, is considered to be unhealthy. So what we're getting there is this vertical axis being exploited in psychoanalysis with sublimation, kind of drawing from the chemical/alchemical process of sublimation, indicating the ascension of some volatile or spiritual component, transformation of a solid into a spiritual component, volatile component. And in psychoanalysis, we also meet its contraindication, contradistinction in the form of repression, when that solid and perhaps unwanted substance is not volatilized into spirit, but is buried underground like a murder victim. What else is going on with that sublimation? Well, one of the references that I came across, and I think this is in Baudrillard, but I might be somewhere else, is the sense that that in this transformation of the solid to the vaporous, this upward transformation, this ascending transformation, there's also a sense in which knowledge is being converted to wisdom. I think, and actually it's not Baudrillard, I think that's also Bachelard, and I will check. So the hard nuggets of knowledge are placed in the bottom of the test tube, subjected to alchemical heat of some sort of cognitive process, transformed into wisdom. And wisdom, of course, being kind of elevated, is also gives oversight, also allows for more encompassing embrace of the imagined world, if you like. And so you have that sense, I think, also present within that. Anything else about sublimation? Well, I've mentioned religion, of course, and the term sublime is... I must find what sublime means, actually. I don't know what the origins of that term are. I must find out. But the sublime in religious practice and the sublime in paintings is a kind of aesthetic, in the most literal sense, sense of wisdom, an aesthetic engagement with the elevated, the wise, the spiritual, and the lucid. And again, this is something that Bachelard, no, this is Baudrillard, I think. He does align this sublime wisdom and its elevated position with clarity and lucidity, as if one is rising into the elevated atmosphere of what I think Bachelard calls onieric vision. And as Mary Poppins might say, up in the atmosphere, up where the air is clear. So I think what we're getting in that tiny little term, sublimation, is quite a complex set of implied relations between substance metaphors, between height metaphors, including elevation and depression, between metaphors of space and encompassing, between metaphors of felt engagement, aesthetics, if you like, and metaphors of light and lucidity. And although we don't necessarily know that we know those things, those are the kind of metaphors which have to be, I suspect, at play within us in order to be able to understand this term sublimation.